Nadine Dorries, by all accounts of what we've heard from not only, shall we say, civil servants who have worked with her, or shall we say, even other ministers that have worked to her, she's not exactly, shall we say, one of the Conservatives' shining stars. Indeed, the only reason she, shall we say, ascended to this particular office was that, well, she's a Boris Johnson loyalist. Indeed, just a couple of weeks ago, she was booted off a Conservative WhatsApp group for being too pro-Boris, saying that now was not the time for infighting, that these people owed Boris their loyalty. To which, after saying that, she was very summarily, very quickly booted off the group. So, needless to say, she's not, shall we say, going to probably stay there if there is, well, a move at number 10. And ultimately, a lot of her reforms that she's trying to do in this, hence why, again, we're going into this article as Nadine Dorries, the big slayer of big tech. Some of these reforms that she's trying to do are quite worrying. And people are not really sure if any of these reforms are really going to stick, because she herself has not educated herself on how any of this stuff works. She's gone into meetings unprepared. She's been asked questions in parliamentary hearings and select committees and had to pass on that question to a junior minister because she could not respond. Now, sometimes that is fine. If MPs get that question, they have to pass it on to a junior minister. But the problem is Nadine Dorries passed on every single questions to junior ministers. And you can't be really doing that when it's your job to be in charge of reporting that to a select committee. It's your job. So let's go diving into this and find out more about Nadine Dorries' plans to slay big tech. But before we do that, please do remember to hit the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all those people who do support the channel that way. Even if you do, just click the like and share button. So, on to Nadine. So this comes from Politico with the title of Nadine Dorries, Britain's Big Tech Slayer. Britain's digital minister has big tech in her sight, but critics worry she is not sufficiently across all the details for her reforms to stick. Promoted to Boris Johnson's top team in last September, the Digital, Culture, Media and Sport Secretary, again, a lot of roles, Secretary Nadine Dorries, initially made headlines with a very enthusiastic attacks on woke culture because of her personal loyalty to the Prime Minister. But the outspoken romantic novelist has also proved very eager to ramp up pressure on tech platforms because of what she sees as their failure to deal with terroristic propaganda and child sex abuse, and since Russia invaded Ukraine, as a very vocal critic of disinformation online. Beyond Britain, many will eye her efforts as very early examples of trying to balance and tackling the harmful, misleading content online with the freedom of speech demanded by democratic societies. In her first 6 months on the job, Dorries has earned plaudits for bringing new life to the very long-stalled tech legislation that spent years in civil service limbo. Yet, her detractors warn of the very same zeal. Both for Johnson and himself against big tech, they could prove problematic as she grapples with the very deeply controversial brief of trying to rein in harmful content on social media platforms. They argue that her determination is not always matched with the eye for digital details. She is very clear on the stamp that she wants to leave on her time at the DCMS, the Department for Digital Media, Culture and Sport, and the online safety bill, and wanting to ensure that children are protected and dealing with the power of the platforms, a department official who has worked closely with Dorries said. The day before, of course, the Russian tanks rule in Ukraine, Dorries wrote to the UK's media regulator Ofcom, calling for timely and transparent action against RT. And the Kremlin-backed broadcaster, formerly known as Russia Today, today, she warned that the Russian government was concluding an aggressive set of information campaigns against Ukraine and NATO in a very transparent and shameful attempt to justify the renewed military action against Ukraine. While Dorries's letter acknowledged Ofcom as the regulatory independence, some critics do worry that the Secretary of State was overreaching, undermining a regulatory setup that is supposed to keep politicians out of the business of policing news, and they worry that such willingness to interfere does not bode well for the regulator or for harmful content online more broadly. Much as I personally feel that I would like Russia Today to be held for account, if there is a regulator, it must be the regulator that does that, said James Kinnock of the Open Rights Group. All that letter saves up to do is to help Nadine Dorries grandstand on one hand and apply political pressure to the regulator that we need to be independent. The fact that they've prepared to do this in these circumstances tells you what they will do in every circumstances with online harms, he added. It is an obvious problem with the model that they propose. The DCMS declined to be interviewed, of course, about this. The UK's, of course, new proposal of law to regulate harmful content online floats very hefty penalties for sites that do fail to remove illegal material such as terrorist propaganda and child sex abuse. It also imposes the so-called heavy duty of care for platforms where people can interact with each other, making them responsible for policing online content and protecting users from content deemed harmful. The full text of the proposal will be published Thursday, and although the government's key objectives have already been made public, Dorries was very quick to put her stamp on the law. The social media sites hosting large amounts of pornographic material will have to work under the same age verification rules as adult content sites. She's unveiled plans to force social networks to let users filter out unverified accounts and promised the big platforms will have a legal duty to protect users from the fraudulent payment paid for advertisements, a move that has been previously resisted by the government. Campaigners do wanting tougher actions against big tech that already spy an ally. Ibrahim Ahmad, the founder of the Center for Countering Digital Hate, that highlights misinformation online and pushes for reform, said that Dorries is a conviction politician. And this is what you want when you're going to need to take on the world's most aggressive lobbying industries. The final online safety bill is likely to be very tougher for businesses under Dorries than it would likely been under former secretaries of state, agreed Ben Greenstone. The former senior official in the department, who now runs the consultancy Telso Advisory, he cited the recently published broad list of illegal content platforms that will be required to act on when this bill becomes law. Dorries's sprawling brief does also include sport, media, and culture, but she has focused heavily on online safety and international data flows, a topic her predecessor, Oliver Dowden, took up with relish as a chance to boast about Brexit dividends. And this has obviously been left to a very junior minister, Julia Lopez, according to one insider, who said that Dorries delegates far more than her predecessor. Dorries has framed the online safety bills debate as a deeply personal mission. She often references her 3 grown-up daughters in meetings and has spoken about the devastating experience of meeting parents of children who've taken their own lives when she was Johnson's mental health minister. It was not that they went online and looked for the means to do so, but because the algorithms took them in that direction, whether it was the pro-anorexia sites, the suicide chat rooms, or the self-harm sites, she told MPs back in November. The second official to close to Dorries said that she's very pragmatic about what's achievable. She can write a bill that says protect children, but it won't pass. It's not going to help anyone, they said. Dorries herself is no stranger to controversy. The self-made businesswoman and successful author, by her own admission, was surprised to be promoted to the cabinet. The cabinet of Conservative MPs was already well known in Westminster when she was appointed the brief. She previously angered some in her party by going on a reality television show, I'm a Celebrity, back in November of 2012, taking away from her parliamentary duties. And she was temporarily suspended from the Conservative Party by David Cameron as a result. Her feud with Cameron, of course, is very legendary and apparently is still ongoing. She has recently likened him to a ticket tout with a picture of the ex-MP wearing a baseball cap when published. With Johnson, however, she has displayed a loyalty so fierce it has been criticised for crossing the line into fake news. At the height of the so-called Partygate row, in which Johnson and his team were accused of hosting very boozy parties during the coronavirus lockdowns, the Prime Minister hit back at the opposition Labour leader Keir Starmer, a former director of public prosecutions, for spending most of his time for failing to prosecute Jimmy Savile, a former television personality who sexually abused hundreds of thousands of children at the height of his fame. Dorries swiftly jumped to her boss's defense, despite the fact-checking website concluding that Starmer was not personally involved in any of the decisions on that case. Challenged on those claims, Johnson was promoting conspiracy theories. Dorries insisted that the Prime Minister tells the truth, and her supporters dismissed criticisms about the disinformation as political point scoring. On Twitter, Dorries even rarely holds back from voicing her views, making jokes and taking on critics with the approach that opponents argue has led to multiple gaffes. Past Twitter comments on race, culture, and media have been scrutinised again since she was put in charge of the government's digital policy. She was criticised for telling a British journalist to appreciate the country that she'd lived in for decades instead of tweeting about abuse. She drew flack from London's first Muslim mayor to read out an Islamophobic death threat he had recently received, telling Sadiq Khan he should instead be talking about Muslim grooming gangs. But for all of Dorries's passion, some of those who have worked very closely with her says that she has time lacked the grips with the detail. Remind you of anyone else? Dorries has arrived at meetings with software giant Microsoft and immediately asked where they were going to get rid of the algorithms. And according to an official giving an account of that meeting, she also raised the very same issue in separate stakeholder meetings, and a lobbyist very familiar with the exchange said this: while campaigners are criticizing the way the algorithms are used by platforms, alleging that they value user engagement at all costs and promote harmful biases, calls for reforms that focus on the design and a push for transparency rather than an outright ban. A second official close to Dorries accepted her desire to combat the negative behaviour may have been, quote, lost in translation. John Nicholson, a political opponent who holds the culture brief for the SNP, is unimpressed. When you see her before a select committee of MPs, she's rarely able to answer a question on her own. She has to turn to a civil servant of the minister, whoever she's with, and she's just not briefed. She doesn't bother to brief herself, and she doesn't seem to have much knowledge or background about any of the subjects in her portfolio, he said. But another official close to Dorries insists that she's simply allowing the, quote, female expert in the room to speak out, including the top official working on legislation, Sarah Connolly, and the Director for Security of Online Harms. There are people in the team who have worked on this for at least 5 or 6 years now, some really smart, dedicated officials, and Nadine regularly turns to the officials in meetings because she's not afraid to empower these people around her, particularly the people who are experts in their fields, to give them time to speak out. That's a positive thing, the official added. Others have suggested snobbery about sexism and prompts much of the criticism. I think that she's certainly worse than a lot of the male cabinet members and politics generally, said a second lobbyist. It is always going to take time to go over the details of tech policy, and it's almost a different language, one official is quoted above to have said. Officials and minister colleagues and lobbyists all say that DISA's very warm and genuine interest and passion for child protection has won over many stakeholders, and an approach that is not technical or bureaucratic or expert. It is a benefit, said a third Whitehall official with knowledge of the bill. She's been able to drive the online harms bill more because she's got a clear vision of what she wants and trying to achieve, rather than trying to balance the countervailing positions that can be squared off, another official said. However, one Conservative colleague predicts trouble ahead and fears that Dorries will come up against some very heated and I think rather disingenuous free speech arguments in Parliament. I think there are inherent tensions between protecting users from harmful content and abuse and those who believe the legislation could see tech companies censor free speech, the MP said. I think she will find that very deeply uncomfortable because she's much more comfortable being a friend of the Libertarian Conservative MP, David Davis, than she is being a friend of someone who would think as a sort of snowflake. She is going to find herself in a very uncomfortable position, they added. Dorries addressed some of that criticism in a piece for Conservative Home on her website on Wednesday, insisting that there will be considerably stronger protections for free speech in the bill. Right now, there is no official right to appeal when a post is taken down. Under this bill, there will be, she said. For his own part, Davies says he's a fan of Dorries, praising for the fact she's not a, quote, boring conformist, and is sympathetic for her plight on protecting children, but says the problems comes in identifying children online. It seems to me the department philosophically has ignored that option, he said. We have gone down this route of trying to protect everybody for things to act. Is it proper to protect children from? Dorries' department does believe that she has a wider public and firmly on her side in taking on these tech titans. The theory is about to be put to the test, and many of those across the world will be watching to see if she is right. And that's the very interesting thing, of course, because a lot of these things potentially in the bill are going to run head straight up against what we've seen before, the very conservative libertarian right, who are all about free speech. And it's going to be very, very interesting to see what they and how they react to the bill. Because remember, she's got to fight her own colleagues on this. And that is going to be very, very interesting to see, almost certainly in Parliament. And if this gets spicy, this is going to get very spicy very quickly. So, as always, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you all next time.